Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're building a cozy little survival base while I tell you about someone whose best friend crossed a line so twisted it almost sounds fictional. Grab your favorite blanket, settle in, and let's dive into this mess together. This story starts with a betrayal most of us couldn't even imagine. But it doesn't end there, because when desperation knocks on your door years later, you get to decide whether you open it or let them stand in the rain they created. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this played out. I thought I'd move past the betrayal when my best friend Sarah married my ex-boyfriend Jake 2 years after our breakup. I even attended their wedding to prove I was over it. Not because I wanted to celebrate their love or anything poetic like that, but because I needed everyone, including myself, to believe I had moved on, that I was fine, that their relationship didn't bother me in the slightest. So I showed up in a nice dress, smiled through the ceremony, and toasted to their future like a mature adult who definitely wasn't dying inside. For context, Jake and I had dated for 3 years. We met in college, did the whole young love thing, talked about futures and forever. Then he cheated on me with someone from his gym. I found out through Instagram of all places, and we imploded spectacularly. It was messy and painful, and I leaned heavily on Sarah to get through it. She was my person, my ride or die, the friend who showed up with ice cream and terrible movies and let me ugly cry on her couch for weeks. So when she started dating Jake barely 6 months after our breakup, it felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. She swore it just happened, that they ran into each other at a coffee shop and started talking and realized they had this connection. She apologized over and over, said she never meant to hurt me, but also made it clear she wasn't going to stop seeing him. I was supposed to understand, to be happy for them, to get over it because, technically, Jake was single and so was she. I didn't have the energy to fight it. I was already exhausted from the breakup itself, and losing my best friend on top of that felt like too much to process. So I just stepped back. I stopped answering her calls as frequently, stopped going to group hangouts where they'd show up together. I created distance and convinced myself it was healing. Then came the wedding invitation. Part of me wanted to throw it away and pretend I never got it. But another part of me, the stubborn part, decided I needed to go. I needed to prove to everyone, especially to myself, that I had moved on, that I was thriving, that their happiness didn't affect me. So I RSVP'd yes, bought a gift from their registry, and showed up with a smile plastered on my face. The wedding itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. Sarah looked stunning, Jake looked nervous, and everyone cried during the vows. I sat in the back, clapped at the right moments, and left early enough to avoid the awkwardness of the reception. Mission accomplished. I'd proven my point. I was fine. For 2 years, I barely heard from them. We'd exchanged polite messages on birthdays, the occasional like on social media, but that was it. I'd built a new life, new friends, a new relationship that was actually healthy and respectful. I genuinely thought I'd moved past the whole thing. Then came the christening invitation. I almost didn't go. My boyfriend at the time thought it was weird that they even invited me, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. But Sarah had sent a personal message along with the invitation saying how much it would mean to her if I came, that she missed me, that she wanted to reconnect. And, like an idiot, I thought maybe enough time had passed. Maybe we could actually be friends again. The christening was at a small church, followed by a reception at Sarah's parents' house. I arrived with a gift, made small talk with people I used to know, and waited for the ceremony to start. Everything was fine until the priest asked for the baby's name. Sarah and Jake stood at the front, holding their daughter, and Jake said it loud and clear. My name. My exact first and middle name combination. Not a variation, not something similar. My actual name. The room went silent for a beat, and then people started clapping like it was normal, like it wasn't the most bizarre, uncomfortable thing in the world. I felt my face go hot. My stomach dropped. I looked around to see if anyone else was as confused as I was, but most people didn't know the history. They didn't know why this was so twisted. After the ceremony, Sarah found me in the crowd. She had this huge smile on her face, and she pulled me aside like we were about to share some beautiful moment. She said she'd named the baby after me to honor our friendship, that I'd always been so important to her, and she wanted her daughter to carry that connection. I just stared at her. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe it was some misguided, genuinely sweet gesture, but the look in her eyes told me otherwise. There was something smug about it, something possessive. I managed to get through the reception without making a scene, but I left as soon as I could. I didn't confront her then because I needed time to process what had just happened. Was I overreacting? Was this actually some twisted power move? Or was I reading too much into it? But that wasn't even the worst part. A few weeks later, I reached out to Sarah and asked if we could meet for coffee. I needed to understand. I needed to hear her explain this in private, away from the crowd and the performance of it all. She agreed and we met at a cafe halfway between our places. I asked her directly, why my name? Why that name specifically? And at first, she stuck to the story, said it was to honor me, to keep me close. But the more I pushed, the more her facade cracked. Finally, she admitted the truth. Jake still talked about me, constantly. He compared her to me. He brought me up in arguments. He'd even said my name during a fight once, and it had shattered her. So naming their daughter after me was her way of taking control, of claiming the name, of making it hers and not mine. She actually said the words, "It was my way of keeping you in your place." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't about honoring me. It was about ownership, about erasing me while simultaneously keeping me trapped in their relationship. It was one of the most manipulative things I'd ever experienced. I told her we were done, that I wanted nothing to do with her or Jake ever again. I blocked her number, blocked her on social media, and walked out of that cafe without looking back. For 6 months, I heard nothing. I moved on with my life. I focused on my relationship, my career, my actual friends who didn't name their children after me as some weird psychological warfare tactic. I thought it was over. Then Jake showed up at my door. It was late on a Saturday night. I was in my pajamas, halfway through a movie with my boyfriend, when someone knocked. I opened the door and there he was, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He asked if we could talk, said it was important. My boyfriend was not thrilled, but I stepped outside to hear him out. Jake told me everything, how his marriage was falling apart, how Sarah was obsessed with me in this unhealthy way, how every argument circled back to me, to the past, to the name. He said he regretted everything, regretted how he'd treated me, regretted marrying Sarah, regretted the mess he'd created. He actually cried. He begged me to talk to Sarah, to help fix things like I owed him or her anything after what they'd put me through. I should have told him to leave. I should have slammed the door in his face. But instead, I let him talk. I let him spill every ugly detail about their toxic relationship, and I recorded it. Every word, every confession, every regret. When he finally left, I had over an hour of audio. I edited it down to the most damning parts. The parts where he admitted he still thought about me. The parts where he said marrying Sarah was a mistake. The parts where he described their relationship as a nightmare. Then I sent it to Sarah with a simple message. Keep my name. You've earned this nightmare. I blocked Jake too after that. I never heard from either of them again. I don't know if they stayed together or got divorced. I don't know if they're still using my name or if they finally realized how twisted the whole thing was. And honestly, I don't care. They wanted to keep me tangled in their mess, but I cut myself free. And sometimes the best revenge isn't some elaborate plan. It's just giving people exactly what they asked for and walking away. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from, because this is just the tip of the iceberg tonight. But if you think naming a baby after your ex's former best friend is manipulative, wait until you hear what happened when someone discovered jewelry that should have been buried. My mother passed away 3 years ago, and if I'm being honest, I'm still not over it. I don't think you ever really get over losing your mum. You just learn to carry the grief differently. She didn't leave behind much when she died. No big inheritance, no property, no secret savings account. Just memories, a few boxes of photos, and one single piece of jewelry that meant everything to me. It was a vintage sapphire necklace. Not flashy, not ostentatious, just this beautiful, delicate piece from the 1950s that my grandmother had given her. My mom wore it on every special occasion, every birthday, every anniversary, every holiday dinner. I have 1,000 memories of her wearing that necklace, and when she passed, it became mine. I kept it in our bedroom safe, the kind of safe that's bolted to the floor with a combination only I knew. I didn't wear it often because it felt too precious, too fragile. I was terrified of losing it or damaging it, so I'd take it out only on her birthday, wear it for the day, talk to her like she was still here, and then carefully put it back. It was my ritual, my way of keeping her close. My husband Mark knew how much that necklace meant to me. He'd seen me cry over it more times than I could count. He'd held me on her birthday when the grief felt too heavy. He knew that necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was the last physical piece of my mother I had left. Last month, Mark insisted I attend his company dinner. He worked for a tech firm, and they had this big annual event where partners were expected to show up and schmooze with clients and executives. I usually didn't mind going. I'd put on a nice dress, make polite conversation, and we'd leave early enough to avoid the awkward dancing portion of the evening. But this time, Mark was weirdly insistent. He kept saying how important it was that I be there, how much it would mean to him, how his boss specifically wanted to meet me. In retrospect, that should have been the first red flag. Mark had never cared that much about me attending work events before. I agreed because I didn't have a reason not to. I picked out a black dress, did my hair and makeup, and we drove to the venue together. The event was at this upscale hotel ballroom, the kind with chandeliers and too many forks at each place setting. Mark immediately got pulled into conversations with colleagues, so I grabbed a glass of wine and wandered around, making small talk with whoever seemed approachable. That's when I saw her. She was standing across the room, laughing at something someone had said, and I noticed the necklace first. The sapphire caught the light in this specific way that I recognized instantly. My brain didn't process it at first. I thought maybe it was a similar necklace, a coincidence, because there was no possible way this stranger was wearing my mother's necklace. But as I got closer, I knew. I knew every detail of that piece, the small scratch on the clasp, the slightly uneven setting on one of the smaller stones, the way the chain had a tiny kink from where my mum had caught it on a door handle years ago. It was my necklace. I walked up to her, trying to keep my voice steady. I complimented her necklace and asked where she got it. She smiled, touched it gently, and said it was a gift from someone special. Then she introduced herself as Mark's colleague and complimented my dress, Mark's colleague. I felt my stomach drop. I looked around the room and spotted Mark watching us from across the ballroom. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. Panic, guilt, fear. I excused myself, walked straight to the bathroom, and locked myself in a stall. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I called a locksmith. I told him it was an emergency and that I needed my locks changed immediately. He said he could be there in an hour. Then I called my lawyer. Left a voicemail telling her I needed to file for divorce as soon as possible and that I'd explain everything in the morning. I didn't go back to the ballroom. I didn't confront Mark. I didn't make a scene. I just left. I took an Uber home, met the locksmith at my house, and watched as he changed every single lock. Front door, back door, garage, side gate, everything. While he worked, I went into our bedroom and opened the safe. Empty. The necklace was gone, obviously, but so were a few other things I'd kept in there. My passport, some cash, a few important documents. He'd cleaned it out. The locksmith finished around midnight. I paid him in cash, thanked him, and then started gathering Mark's belongings. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, laptop, everything. I piled it all on the front lawn. Then I printed out a copy of a blank divorce petition I found online, filled in the basics, and taped it to the front door. Mark came home at 2 in the morning. I watched from the upstairs window as he pulled into the driveway and sat in his car for a long time, staring at the pile of his stuff on the lawn. Then he got out, walked up to the door, and tried his key. When it didn't work, he knocked. Then he pounded on the door. Then he started yelling. I didn't answer. I just stood at the window and watched. Eventually, he loaded his things into his car and left. He tried calling me 47 times that night. I didn't answer any of them. The next morning, I met with my lawyer and told her everything. She asked if I had proof of the affair, and I realized I didn't. Not concrete proof anyway. Just the necklace and my gut instinct. But then she asked if I had access to our joint credit card statements, and that's when I started digging. Turns out Mark had been paying for a lot of things I didn't know about. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry stores. It was all right there in black and white. Months of evidence. Then came the breaking point. A few days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was her, the mistress. She said her name was Amber, and she wanted to return the necklace. She claimed she didn't know it was stolen, that Mark had told her it was a family heirloom he inherited and wanted to give her. She sounded genuinely upset, but I didn't care. I told her she could return it through Mark's lawyer and that I'd be keeping it as evidence in the divorce proceedings. She started crying, saying she didn't want to be involved, that she didn't know he was married at first, that everything had gotten out of control. I hung up. Amber did try to return the necklace. She sent it to Mark's lawyer with a note apologizing and claiming ignorance. My lawyer advised me to accept it back, but to document everything. So I did. I took photos, got written statements, and added it all to the divorce file. But here's where it gets absurd. Mark's company had a strict policy about workplace relationships and affairs, especially between employees. When HR caught wind of what was happening, they launched an internal investigation. Apparently, Mark had been using company resources to facilitate the affair, booking hotel rooms on the corporate card, taking her to client dinners and expensing it, even using company time to meet up with her. HR fired him, not quietly either. They made an example of him, sent out a vague but pointed email about policy violations and inappropriate conduct. Everyone at that company knew exactly what had happened. Mark tried to fight the divorce, tried to claim he deserved half of everything, but my lawyer was ruthless. She presented every receipt, every credit card statement, every piece of evidence showing he'd been funneling our money into his affair. She argued that he'd stolen from me, lied to me, and violated my trust in the most disgusting way possible. The judge agreed. I got the house, I got alimony, I got my mother's necklace back. Mark got nothing but a ruined reputation and a failed marriage. Amber stopped trying to contact me after the necklace was returned. I don't know if they're still together. I don't know if she feels guilty or if she's moved on to someone else's husband. I genuinely don't care. The necklace is back in the safe now. Different safe, different combination, different house eventually. I still only take it out on my mom's birthday. But now, when I wear it, it means something different. It's not just a connection to her. It's a reminder that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can lose everything and still come out on the other side. Mark thought he could take the most important thing I had left of my mother and give it to someone else, like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter. But he was wrong, and honestly, the fact that his whole life unraveled because he couldn't keep it in his pants, that's just poetry. Speaking of family heirlooms and betrayal, you won't believe what happened when someone's sibling decided a wedding was the perfect venue for dropping a bombshell. My sister Melissa hired an expensive photographer for her wedding to David. And when I say expensive, I mean she dropped nearly $8,000 on this guy. Top-of-the-line equipment, years of experience, a portfolio that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She was obsessed with having the perfect wedding documentation. Every moment captured, every angle perfect, every detail preserved forever. David was a genuinely kind guy, the type of person who opened doors for strangers and remembered your coffee order and sent thank you cards for everything. He worshipped Melissa, absolutely adored her. He'd proposed with this elaborate scavenger hunt that ended at the park where they had their first date. And he cried when she said yes. I remember thinking at the time that she didn't deserve him, but I kept that thought to myself because what kind of sister says that out loud? The wedding itself was beautiful. Melissa had planned every detail down to the napkin colors. It was at this gorgeous vineyard venue with string lights and a live band and more flowers than I'd ever seen in one place. David stood at the altar looking like he'd won the lottery, and Melissa walked down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my car. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Vows were exchanged, tears were shed, everyone clapped and cheered. Then we moved to the reception, which was in this massive tent with a dance floor and a chocolate fountain and a bar that seemed to stretch forever. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and then it was time for the slideshow. The photographer had put together a montage of photos from the day, set to music, projected on this huge screen at the front of the tent. Everyone settled into their seats with their drinks, ready to relive the beautiful moments they'd just witnessed. The slideshow started normally enough. Photos of Melissa getting ready with her bridesmaids, David adjusting his tie with his groomsmen. The ceremony, the kiss, everyone oohed and ahed at the right moments. The music was this soft, romantic instrumental piece that fit perfectly. Then the music stopped. The screen went black for a few seconds, and people started murmuring, thinking maybe there was a technical issue. But then new images appeared. And these weren't wedding photos, they were photos of Melissa with David's brother, Connor. Intimate photos, hotel room photos, photos that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Timestamps in the corners showing dates from the past 6 months. Text message screenshots overlaid on some of the images, showing conversations between Melissa and Connor that were explicit and damning and impossible to misinterpret. The tent went silent. Someone gasped. I heard a glass shatter somewhere behind me. Then the photographer's voice came through the speakers, calm and steady, like he was narrating a nature documentary. He said, "And I'll never forget this. Thought the groom should know what he's really marrying." Chaos erupted. David just collapsed into his chair, staring at the screen like he couldn't process what he was seeing. His face went from confused to devastated in about 3 seconds. His mom started screaming. Melissa's face went white, then red, then white again. She tried to run toward the projector, but her dress was too big and she tripped over the train. Connor, David's brother, had been sitting at the family table looking smug all night. The second those photos appeared, he bolted, just stood up and ran out of the tent like the building was on fire. Last I saw, he was sprinting across the vineyard parking lot. People were yelling. Some guests were covering their kids' eyes. Others were filming on their phones because of course they were. The bridesmaids were huddled together looking horrified. The groomsmen were trying to figure out if they should chase Connor, or comfort David, or just pretend they hadn't seen anything. Melissa finally made it to the front and started screaming at the photographer. She was hysterical, demanding he turn it off, threatening to sue, calling him every name in the book. The photographer just calmly packed up his equipment like he was wrapping up any other wedding gig. That's when David's dad stood up and said something that cut through all the noise. He pointed at the screen, where a timestamp was still visible, and said those photos have dates. Metadata. You can't fake that. And here's where it gets absurd. Turns out the photographer wasn't just some random expensive hire. He was David's best friend from college. They'd lost touch over the years, but when David mentioned he was getting married and looking for a photographer, they reconnected. David had no idea his friend suspected anything. No idea that his friend had been specifically hired to investigate. The photographer later told us he'd had a bad feeling about Melissa from the start. Something about the way she acted around Connor at family events. The way they'd exchange looks when they thought no one was watching. So when David asked him to shoot the wedding, he saw it as an opportunity to either confirm his suspicions or prove himself wrong. He followed Melissa a few times, tracked her car to hotels, waited outside with a camera, got the photos, got the receipts, got everything he needed to blow the whole thing wide open. Melissa tried claiming the photos were fake, that someone had photoshopped her face onto someone else's body, that it was all some elaborate revenge plot by someone who hated her. But the metadata was irrefutable. Dates, times, locations, GPS coordinates embedded in the image files. The photographer had documented everything with the kind of precision you'd expect from someone who does this for a living. David didn't say a word. He just sat there in his tuxedo, staring at nothing, while his family tried to comfort him, and Melissa kept spiraling into more and more desperate excuses. The reception obviously ended early. Guests filtered out in awkward silence, some of them still clutching their half-eaten cake. The band packed up, the caterers cleared the tables, and David sat in that chair until almost everyone was gone. Melissa tried to approach him at one point, but his dad physically stepped between them and told her to leave. She left in her wedding dress, alone, crying, without even grabbing her stuff from the bridal suite. David annulled the marriage within the week. I don't even know if you can call it a marriage since they never actually made it to the wedding night. The annulment went through without any contest because Melissa knew she had no leg to stand on. Fraud. Infidelity. Take your pick. Connor got disowned by the family. Haven't heard from him since. Last I heard, he moved to another state and changed his phone number. The photographer refunded Melissa's entire deposit, every penny of that $8,000, and he included a note with the check that said documentation of the truth is always complimentary. That note lived rent-free in my head for weeks. Melissa tried to blame everyone but herself. She said David's family had always been cold to her, that Connor had pursued her, that the photographer was obsessed with ruining her life, but no one bought it. You don't accidentally have a 6-month affair with your fiancé's brother. That takes planning, deception, a level of cruelty that I didn't think my sister was capable of. David moved on eventually. Last I heard, he's dating someone new and actually happy. He cut ties with our family completely, which honestly I don't blame him for. We tried to apologize on Melissa's behalf, but there's really no apology big enough for what she did. Melissa still lives in town, but she's basically a social pariah now. The story spread like wildfire. Everyone knows what she did. She tried to spin it on social media, tried to play the victim, but people aren't stupid. The evidence was too damning. And the photographer, he became kind of a legend. I've heard people specifically seek him out now because of what he did. They want someone who's loyal to the truth, even when it's ugly. He still shoots weddings, still does beautiful work, but now everyone knows he's not afraid to expose the truth if he finds it. I think about that night a lot, about how one person's decision to be honest unraveled an entire facade, about how David almost married someone who was actively betraying him, about how close he came to a lifetime of lies. The audacity of planning a wedding while cheating with the groom's brother is something I still can't wrap my head around. Like, at what point do you look at yourself in the mirror and think, yeah, this is fine? But I guess some people are just built different. And by different, I mean terrible. While we're on the subject of shocking revelations at major life events, imagine showing up to your college graduation only to discover your father's been living a double life. Graduation day should have been perfect. I'd worked my ass off for 4 years, pulled countless all-nighters, survived on ramen and coffee, and finally made it to the finish line. My entire family flew in to watch me receive my diploma. My mom, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, everyone. It was supposed to be this huge celebration of everything I'd accomplished. The ceremony was at the university stadium, one of those massive outdoor events where they call out hundreds of names and everyone cheers at the wrong times. I was somewhere in the middle of the alphabet, so I had plenty of time to sit in my folding chair, sweating under my gown, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. That's when I saw him. My dad was sitting in the bleachers, but he wasn't with my mom. He was sitting with a woman I'd never seen before and 3 kids. 3 kids who looked like they ranged from maybe 5 to 12 years old. They were all wearing nice clothes, holding flowers, cheering for graduates whose names I didn't recognize. At first I thought maybe I was seeing things wrong. Maybe it was someone who just looked like my dad. But no, it was definitely him. Same receding hairline, same glasses, same way of sitting with his arms crossed. I kept staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, when the youngest kid climbed into his lap and my dad wrapped his arms around him like it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach dropped. I barely heard my name when they called it. I walked across that stage in a complete daze, shook hands with people I won't remember, accepted my diploma, and smiled for a photo I'll probably never look at. The whole time, my brain was trying to process what I'd just seen. After the ceremony ended, I didn't go find my mom and grandparents like I was supposed to. I went straight to the parking lot, found my dad, and confronted him. He was loading the kids into a minivan I'd never seen before. The woman was buckling the youngest one into a car seat. When my dad saw me walking toward him in my cap and gown, his face went completely pale. I asked him who they were. He stammered something about them being old friends, colleagues from work, people he'd known for years. The excuse was so weak I almost laughed. Then the youngest boy, maybe 5 years old, looked at me and said, "Hi, is this another one of Daddy's friends?" Daddy. The woman turned around, saw me, saw my dad's face, and I watched her put it together in real time. She asked who I was, and I said I'm his daughter, the one he apparently forgot to mention. She introduced herself as his wife of 12 years. 12 years. I did the math in my head. 12 years ago, I was 10 years old. My parents were still together. We were living in the same house, going on family vacations, doing normal family things, and apparently my dad had an entire second family I knew nothing about. The woman, her name was Jennifer, looked as shocked as I felt. She started asking my dad questions, her voice getting louder and shakier. The kids were confused, asking what was going on, why everyone was upset. My dad just stood there, frozen, looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. I pulled out my phone and texted my mom, told her not to come to the restaurant, told her to stay where she was. Then I sent her a photo of my dad standing next to his other wife, and their 3 kids. She called me immediately, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't have words for what was happening. Jennifer demanded answers. She wanted to know if I was telling the truth, if my dad really had another family, how long this had been going on. My dad tried to placate her, tried to calm everyone down, but it was too late. The truth was out, standing in a parking lot in broad daylight, and there was no putting it back in the box. I left. I didn't wait for explanations or apologies. I just walked away, still in my cap and gown, and went back to my apartment. But that wasn't even the worst part. That evening, my mom showed up at my apartment, then my grandparents, then my aunt and uncle. They'd all seen the photo. They all had questions I couldn't answer. My mum was devastated, crying, asking me if I'd known, if I'd been hiding this from her. I told her I had no idea, that I was just as blindsided as she was. Then Jennifer showed up, with the kids, with my dad trailing behind her, looking like a man walking to his own execution. My tiny apartment became the site of the most awkward, painful, explosive confrontation I've ever witnessed. Jennifer wanted answers from my mum, like my mum had somehow been complicit in this. My mum wanted answers from my dad, screaming at him about how he could do this, how he could lie for over a decade. My grandparents were yelling, the kids were crying. I just sat on my couch in my cap and gown, diploma still in my hand, watching my entire world implode. My dad tried to explain, tried to say he'd made mistakes, that things had gotten complicated, that he'd never meant for it to go this far. But there's no explanation that makes sense when you've been living 2 completely separate lives for 12 years. He'd been splitting his time between 2 families, 2 homes, 2 sets of kids, 2 wives who both thought they had his full commitment. He had a system, a schedule, a whole network of lies that kept everything compartmentalized. And it all came crashing down in a parking lot on my graduation day. The chaos lasted for hours. Eventually, everyone left except my mum, who stayed with me that night. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us trying to process what had just happened. She kept apologizing, like any of this was her fault, like she should have known. But how could she have known? My dad was a master at compartmentalizing. He traveled for work, or at least that's what he told us. He had late nights at the office, weekend conferences, business trips that now made horrifying sense. Every absence had been carefully explained, every gap in his schedule accounted for with a believable lie. My parents divorced within 3 months. The process was fast because my mum wanted nothing to do with him. She didn't fight for assets or argue about division of property. She just wanted out, wanted to erase him from her life as quickly as legally possible. Jennifer filed for divorce too. Turns out she had no interest in staying married to someone who'd been lying to her for over a decade either. Funny how that works. My dad tried to reach out to me a few times after everything fell apart. Sent emails, left voicemails, showed up at my apartment once before I told him to leave and never come back. He wanted to explain, wanted me to understand his side of things, but there is no side that makes this okay. There's no perspective that justifies what he did to 2 families, to 5 kids who all thought they had a father they could trust. He now lives alone in a studio apartment across town. No wife, no kids from either family speaking to him. He destroyed 2 marriages, shattered countless relationships, and for what? I still don't understand what he thought was going to happen. Did he think he could maintain this forever? Did he think no one would ever find out? The 3 kids from his second family are my half-siblings technically. I've met them a few times since everything happened. They're good kids. None of this was their fault. But it's complicated, trying to build a relationship with people who are a living reminder of your dad's betrayal. My mum eventually moved on, started dating someone new, someone honest and kind, who doesn't have a secret second family hidden somewhere. She's happier now than I've seen her in years, which is something, I guess. I think about that day a lot, about sitting in those bleachers, seeing my dad with people I didn't recognize, and having my entire understanding of my childhood rewritten in an instant. Every memory is tainted now. Every family dinner, every birthday, every moment I thought was real, I now have to wonder where he was before or after, who else he was with, what lies he told to be there. My graduation day was supposed to be about celebrating an achievement. Instead, it became the day I learned that my entire childhood had been a carefully constructed lie. that the person I trusted most in the world had been living a double life for over a decade. And honestly, the fact that he thought he could keep it going, that he was so confident in his lies that he brought his second family to my graduation, is almost impressive in how delusional it is. Family secrets can destroy everything you thought you knew, but imagine if someone in your family was actively trying to steal the most precious thing in your life. After my daughter Emma was born, my mother-in-law Linda insisted on helping with overnight feedings. At first, I thought it was sweet. She'd show up at our house in the evenings, telling me to get some rest, that she'd handle the night shift so I could recover. I was exhausted in a way I didn't know was possible, so I agreed. New mom brain fog is real, and I figured having an extra set of hands would be helpful. Linda would make me tea before bed. Chamomile, she said, to help me relax and sleep better. She'd sit with me while I drank it, asking about my day, cooing over Emma, being the picture-perfect grandmother. Then I'd go to bed and I'd sleep. Hard. The kind of sleep where you don't move, don't dream, don't wake up even when your newborn is crying in the next room. For weeks, this became our routine. Linda would come over, make tea, I'd drink it, and I'd be out cold until morning. I'd wake up disoriented, groggy, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Linda would already be in the nursery, feeding Emma, rocking her, singing to her. She'd smile and say I'd slept through the feedings, that Emma had been perfect, that I clearly needed the rest. My husband thought it was great. He worked long hours and was grateful his mum was helping out. He'd tell me how lucky we were to have her support, how most new parents don't have that kind of help. And I wanted to agree. I wanted to be grateful. But something felt wrong. The sleep was too deep, the grogginess too intense. I'd wake up and not remember going to bed. I'd find myself in different positions than I fell asleep in, like someone had moved me. And Emma, who usually woke up multiple times a night, suddenly seemed to sleep through everything when Linda was there. I mentioned it to my husband once, said I felt weird after drinking the tea, that maybe I was having some kind of reaction to the chamomile. He brushed it off, said I was just exhausted, that new mums always feel tired, that I was overthinking things, but I wasn't overthinking. Something was very, very wrong. One night I pretended to drink the tea. I held it up to my lips, tilted the cup, but didn't actually swallow. Linda was distracted with Emma, so she didn't notice. I went to my bedroom, poured the tea into a plant on my nightstand, and lay down, pretending to sleep. I stayed awake. It was hard. My body was screaming for rest, but I forced myself to stay conscious, and I listened. Around midnight, I heard Linda's footsteps in the hallway. She opened my bedroom door, stood there for a moment, then whispered my name. I didn't respond. She came closer, said my name louder, then nudged my shoulder. I stayed perfectly still, controlling my breathing. Pretending to be unconscious, she left. I heard her go to the nursery, heard her pick up Emma, heard her cooing and talking to her in this possessive way that made my skin crawl. She was saying things like, "Mommy's sleeping, so it's just us, and Grandma loves you so much, more than anyone else." I wanted to get up and confront her right then, but I didn't. I needed proof. I needed evidence that what I suspected was actually happening. The next day, I ordered a nanny cam, one of those hidden ones that looks like a normal object. I set it up in the kitchen, angled toward the counter where Linda made my tea every night. I didn't tell my husband. I knew he wouldn't believe me without concrete proof. That night, Linda came over like usual, made the tea like usual, sat with me while I drank it like usual. I pretended everything was fine, drank the tea, went to bed, and once again, I was out cold until morning. When I woke up, I immediately checked the camera footage on my phone. What I saw made me physically ill. Linda had made the tea, but before bringing it to me, she'd taken a pill bottle out of her purse. She crushed 2 pills into powder using the back of a spoon, stirred it into my tea, and then brought it to me with a smile on her face. After I went to bed, the camera caught her going into my room multiple times, checking to make sure I was unconscious, then spending hours in the nursery with Emma. I watched 6 weeks worth of footage over the next few hours, and it was all the same. Every single night, Linda had been crushing pills into my tea. Every single night, she'd been drugging me so she could have Emma to herself. I called the police immediately. I didn't confront Linda first. I didn't tell my husband first. I called the police, showed them the footage, and told them I needed help. They took it seriously. They came to the house, interviewed me, took the footage as evidence, and told me not to let Linda near Emma or me until they investigated further. Then I called my husband at work and told him to come home. Now, when he got there and I showed him the footage, he didn't believe it at first. He kept saying there had to be an explanation, that his mum wouldn't do this, that maybe I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. But the footage was clear. There was no misunderstanding crushing pills and putting them in someone's drink. The police ran a toxicology test on me that afternoon. The results came back positive for Ambien, prescription sleep medication that I'd never been prescribed, that I'd never taken willingly. Linda had been systematically drugging me for 6 weeks. When the police went to question Linda, she tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal. She said she was just trying to help, that I was exhausted and needed sleep, and she was doing me a favor, that I was keeping Emma from her, being overprotective, and she just wanted time to bond with her granddaughter. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. She genuinely seemed to believe she'd done nothing wrong, that drugging someone without their knowledge or consent was an acceptable way to get what she wanted, that violating my bodily autonomy and putting me at risk was justified because she wanted more time with Emma. The police arrested her. They charged her with assault, drugging without consent, and child endangerment. Because here's the thing, what if there had been an emergency? What if Emma had choked or stopped breathing, or needed medical attention, and I was unconscious in the next room, unable to wake up because my mother-in-law had drugged me? That realization hit me like a freight train. For 6 weeks, my daughter had been in potential danger because I was too drugged to respond to her needs. A restraining order was issued immediately. Linda wasn't allowed within 500 feet of me or Emma. My husband cut all contact with her, which I know was devastating for him. That's his mum, the woman who raised him, and she'd done something so unforgivable that he couldn't even look at her anymore. Our marriage barely survived, not because my husband defended her, he didn't, but because the betrayal ran so deep that it broke something between us. He felt guilty for not believing me when I first said something was wrong. I felt angry that it took video evidence for him to take me seriously. We went to therapy. We're still going to therapy. Linda's criminal case is still ongoing. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was just a concerned grandmother, that she didn't understand the severity of what she was doing. But the prosecution isn't buying it. You don't crush pills into someone's drink for 6 weeks without understanding exactly what you're doing. The worst part? Linda still doesn't think she did anything wrong. She sent letters, tried to contact us through other family members, insisting she was just trying to help, that we're overreacting, that she deserves to see her granddaughter. She drugged me. For 6 weeks, and she thinks she deserves access to my child. The audacity is almost impressive if it wasn't so horrifying. Emma is 2 now. She's healthy and happy and has no memory of any of this, thank God. But I do. I remember waking up disoriented every morning. I remember feeling like something was wrong and being told I was just tired. I remember the moment I watched that footage and realized my mother-in-law had been poisoning me. I don't drink tea anymore, can't even look at it without feeling nauseous. And I don't trust easily anymore, especially not with people who insist they're just trying to help. My husband asks sometimes if I think we'll ever be able to move past this. And honestly, I don't know. How do you move past someone systematically drugging you to steal time with your baby? How do you forgive that level of violation? You don't. You just learn to live with it. You protect your kid, you set boundaries, and you never let your guard down again. Linda is facing up to 10 years if convicted on all charges. Part of me hopes she gets the maximum. Another part of me just wants her to disappear from our lives entirely. Either way, she's never getting near my daughter again. When it comes to family destroying your life from the inside, sometimes the cruelest weapon isn't drugs, it's a forged signature on the wrong document. My father passed away suddenly, leaving behind a substantial estate. He'd built a successful construction business over 30 years, owned several properties, and had investments that had grown considerably over time. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was enough to set me and my brother Colin up comfortably for life. Dad had always been clear about his wishes. Everything was to be split equally between us, 50-50. No favorites, no complications, just fair. The funeral was brutal. Dad was only 63 and none of us saw it coming. One day he was fine, the next he was gone. Heart attack, quick and painless, the doctor said, like that was supposed to make it better. Colin and I grieved together, or at least I thought we were. We planned the service, went through Dad's things, supported each other the way siblings are supposed to. A week after the funeral, we met with Dad's lawyer to go over the will. I expected it to be straightforward: sign some papers, divide the assets, figure out logistics. I was not prepared for what actually happened. We sat in the lawyer's office and he started going over the will. The original will, the one Dad had drafted 5 years ago, split everything equally like he'd always said. But then Colin pulled out a folder and said there was a newer version, a will dated 2 weeks before Dad's death. The lawyer looked surprised. He said he hadn't been aware of any updates, that Dad hadn't contacted him about changes. Colin insisted this was legitimate, that Dad had worked with a different lawyer to draft it, and that it superseded the previous version. The lawyer reviewed it, and according to this new will, Colin was getting 90% of everything. The business, the properties, the investments. I was getting 10%, barely enough to matter. I sat there in shock, reading the document over and over, trying to make sense of it. Why would Dad do this? What had I done to deserve being cut out? The signature at the bottom looked perfect, exactly like Dad's handwriting. The lawyer said if it was legitimate, it would override the previous will, but he wanted time to verify its authenticity. Colin acted sympathetic, said he was just as surprised as I was, that he didn't know why Dad had made these changes, but that we had to respect his wishes. He even offered to give me an extra 5% out of his share, like that was some generous gesture. I left that office devastated. I called friends, cried to anyone who would listen, tried to understand what I'd done wrong to make Dad change his mind so drastically in his final weeks. But then I remembered something. Dad had been in the hospital those final 2 weeks before he died. Not for his heart, ironically. He'd fallen off a ladder at one of his job sites and broken his dominant hand. His right hand, the hand he wrote with. He'd been in the hospital getting surgery, then recovering at home with his hand in a cast. There was no way he could have signed anything during that time. I called the lawyer immediately and told him. He said that was significant, that we needed to investigate further. I subpoenaed Dad's hospital records, which showed he'd been admitted with a severe fracture and had limited mobility in his right hand for weeks. The dates matched exactly with when this supposed new will was signed. The lawyer hired a handwriting expert to analyze the signature. It took a few weeks, but the results came back conclusive. The signature was forged, and not just poorly forged. It was meticulously copied, like someone had spent months practicing to get it perfect. That someone was Colin. When confronted with the evidence, Colin doubled down. He claimed the hospital records were wrong, that Dad must have signed it before the accident, that the dates were just a clerical error. But the will was dated specifically, and there was no wiggle room. Dad physically could not have signed that document. The lawyer recommended we involve the police. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was fraud, forgery, potentially criminal. The police opened an investigation, and that's when everything unraveled. They searched Colin's apartment and found the evidence. Tracing paper with Dad's signature practiced hundreds of times. Different pens and papers trying to match the original. Drafts of the fake will with notes in the margins. Colin had been planning this for months, maybe longer. But that wasn't even the worst part. The criminal investigation dug deeper into Colin's finances, and they discovered he'd been embezzling from Dad's business for years. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as he got more confident. He'd been siphoning money from company accounts, falsifying records, covering his tracks with fake invoices and expenses. Dad had started to notice discrepancies in the months before he died. He'd mentioned it to me once, said the books weren't adding up, that he was going to hire an outside accountant to do an audit. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just normal business stuff. Colin knew that audit was coming. He knew Dad was going to discover what he'd been doing, so he needed the inheritance. Not just wanted it, needed it. He was planning to use the money to pay back what he'd stolen before anyone found out. The fake will was his insurance policy. If he could get 90% of the estate, he could cover his tracks, pay back the embezzled funds, and no one would ever know. Except Dad died before the audit happened, and Colin thought he could still pull it off. The prosecutor charged him with fraud, forgery, theft, and embezzlement. The evidence was overwhelming. The practiced signatures, the fake will, the financial records showing years of stolen money. Colin tried to plea bargain, tried to claim he'd been under financial stress and made bad decisions, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in going easy on him. Colin is now serving a 5-year sentence. 5 years for destroying our family, for stealing from Dad, for trying to cheat me out of my inheritance. The original will was upheld. Everything was split 50-50, like Dad had always wanted. I inherited the business, the properties, the investments, all of it. And the first thing I did was donate half of my inheritance to Alzheimer's research in Dad's name. Not because I had to, but because it's what Dad would have wanted. He'd lost his own father to Alzheimer's and had always talked about wanting to contribute to research if he ever had the means. Colin would never have done that. He would have kept every penny, used it to fund whatever lifestyle he thought he deserved, and never looked back. I think about Dad a lot, about how he spent 30 years building something, only to have his own son steal from him in his final months, about how he never got to see the audit results, never got to confront Colin, never got justice. But I got justice for him. I made sure Colin faced consequences. I made sure Dad's real wishes were honored. The business is doing well now. I hired a new accountant, cleaned up the books, and found out Colin had stolen even more than the police initially discovered. Over $200,000 over the course of 4 years. Money that should have gone back into the company, into employees, into growth. I've paid back what I could, compensated employees who were affected, and rebuilt the trust that Colin destroyed. Colin writes letters from prison sometimes. Apologies, explanations, excuses. I don't read them. I have them forwarded directly to my lawyer in case they're relevant to any ongoing legal matters, but I don't engage. There's nothing he can say that would make this okay. He didn't just steal money. He stole Dad's final months of peace. He stole my trust. He stole the relationship we had as brothers. And for what? Money he was going to inherit anyway? A slightly bigger piece of the pie? It wasn't even about the money, really. It was about greed, about control, about thinking he was smarter than everyone else and could get away with it. The thing that gets me is how close he came. If I hadn't remembered Dad's broken hand, if the lawyer hadn't taken my concerns seriously, if we hadn't pushed for an investigation, Colin would have gotten away with it. He would have taken everything, covered up his theft, and I would have spent the rest of my life thinking Dad didn't value me. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not the money, but the fact that Colin was willing to let me believe Dad had cut me out. That he was willing to destroy my memory of our father just to save himself. I don't know if Colin has spent his time in prison reflecting on that. I don't know if he feels remorse or if he's just angry he got caught. And honestly, I don't care. Dad always said you find out who people really are when money's involved. Turns out he was right. Just when you think you know someone, even someone who shares your DNA, they can become a stranger wearing your face. My identical twin sister Rachel and I had always been close, until I married Tom. Growing up, we were inseparable. Same classes, same friends, same hobbies. People couldn't tell us apart, and we loved it. We had our own language, our own inside jokes, our own world that no one else could really penetrate. That bond was everything to me. But something shifted when I met Tom. We started dating in our mid-20s, and for the first time in my life, I had something that was just mine, not ours, mine. Tom could tell us apart instantly, which was rare. He said it was something about the way I smiled, the way I carried myself. Rachel hated that. At first, I thought she was just adjusting to the change. She'd been single for years, had gone through a few rough breakups, and I figured she was just feeling left out. But as my relationship with Tom got more serious, Rachel got more bitter. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about how I was abandoning her, how Tom was changing me, how I didn't have time for her anymore. When Tom proposed, Rachel smiled and congratulated us, but I could see it in her eyes. Something cold, something resentful. We got married a year later. Small wedding, close friends and family. Rachel was my maid of honor because how could she not be? But the whole day she seemed off, distant, like she was performing the role of supportive sister but not really feeling it. The first few months of marriage were great. Tom and I settled into our life together, bought a little house, adopted a dog. Everything felt perfect. Then strange things started happening. Tom mentioned that I'd texted him to cancel a dinner date, except I hadn't. I checked my phone and there was no record of sending that message. He showed me the text on his phone and it was from my number in my tone, saying I wasn't feeling well and wanted to reschedule. I brushed it off. Maybe I'd sent it and forgotten. New bride brain fog or something. Then it happened again. Tom said I'd cancelled plans to meet his parents. I hadn't. Another text from my number that I didn't remember sending. Then my boss called me into her office. She said she'd received an email from me complaining about a coworker, using language I would never use, making accusations I didn't believe. I pulled up my sent folder. The email wasn't there, but she forwarded it to me, and it was definitely from my email address, with my signature, everything. I started to panic. Was I losing my mind? Was I doing things and not remembering? I went to a doctor, got checked for early onset dementia, neurological issues, anything that could explain memory loss. Everything came back normal. Tom started pulling away. He said he didn't understand why I kept cancelling plans, why I was acting so erratic, why I seemed like a different person sometimes. I tried explaining that I wasn't doing these things. But how do you argue with text messages and emails that clearly came from you? My marriage was deteriorating fast. Tom and I were fighting constantly. He'd bring up things I supposedly said or did, and I'd have no memory of them. He started questioning whether I actually wanted to be married, whether I was happy, whether I was having an affair. That's when everything unraveled. One afternoon, Tom came home early from work looking shaken. He said someone who looked exactly like me had shown up at his office. She claimed to be me, said she wanted to surprise him, tried to kiss him. But something felt wrong. The way she spoke, the way she moved, little things that were just slightly off. So Tom tested her. He asked what day our anniversary was. She got it wrong, off by a week. Tom realized it wasn't me, it was Rachel. He asked her what she was doing, why she was pretending to be me, and apparently she just smiled and said she wanted to see if he could tell the difference. Then she left. Tom called me immediately, told me everything, and suddenly all the pieces fell into place. The cancelled plans, the weird emails, the text messages I didn't remember sending. It wasn't me, it was Rachel. I felt sick. My own sister had been impersonating me, sabotaging my life. For months, I hired a private investigator that same day. I needed proof. I needed to understand the extent of what she'd been doing. The investigator worked fast. Within a week, he discovered that Rachel had cloned my phone. She'd gotten access to it months ago, probably during a family dinner or some other time I'd left it unattended, and had installed spyware that let her read my texts, see my emails, and even send messages from my accounts. She'd been impersonating me for 8 months. 8 months of systematically destroying my relationships, my reputation, my marriage. The investigator pulled records, text messages to Tom cancelling dates, emails to my boss complaining about coworkers, messages to friends saying I didn't want to hang out anymore. She'd even sent texts to my parents pretending to be upset with them over things that never happened. Rachel had been living a double life, her life and mine. I confronted her. Tom came with me for support. We went to her apartment, knocked on the door, and when she opened it, the look on her face told me she knew we'd figured it out. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone. I asked her why. Why would she do this? Why would she try to destroy my life? And she admitted everything. Said she wanted my life. That she'd always been jealous, always felt like I got everything and she got nothing. That when I married Tom, it was the final straw. She thought if she could ruin my marriage, ruin my relationships, make me miserable, that maybe I'd leave Tom, that maybe I'd come back to her and things would go back to the way they used to be. She actually said the words, if I ruined it, you'd give it to me, like my life was something I could just hand over. I asked her if she understood how insane that sounded. She just shrugged and said she'd done what she thought she had to do. Tom asked if she felt any remorse. She said no. She said she still thought she deserved my life more than I did. The detachment was chilling. This was my twin sister, the person I'd shared a womb with, and she was looking at me like I was an obstacle she needed to remove. I left her apartment, went straight to the police and filed a report. Identity fraud, harassment, cyberstalking, all of it. I handed over the recording, the investigator's findings, everything. The police took it seriously. They charged Rachel with multiple counts of identity theft and harassment. She tried to downplay it, tried to claim it was just a prank between sisters, but the evidence was overwhelming. I pressed charges, fully, no hesitation. Rachel was convicted and sentenced to probation with a restraining order. She's banned from contacting me or Tom, banned from coming within 500 feet of our home or workplaces. If she violates it, she goes to jail. I changed everything after that. Every password, every security question, every account. I got a new phone number, new email addresses, new everything. I set up two-factor authentication on everything, added security alerts, made it as hard as possible for anyone to access my information. Tom and I went to therapy, a lot of therapy, because even though he knew it wasn't me doing those things, the damage had been done. He'd spent months questioning our marriage, questioning me, and that doesn't just go away because you find out the truth. We're still together, still working on it. But it's different now. There's a wariness that wasn't there before, a caution. I haven't spoken to Rachel since the trial. She tried reaching out through mutual friends, through our parents, but I've made it clear I want nothing to do with her. Some betrayals are too big to come back from. Our parents are devastated. They keep trying to mediate, trying to get us to reconcile, saying we're sisters and we need to work it out. But they don't understand. This wasn't a fight over borrowed clothes or a stupid argument. This was calculated, sustained, malicious destruction of my life by someone who was supposed to love me. I mourn the relationship we had. I mourn the twin bond that used to define so much of my identity. But I can't forgive what she did. I can't pretend it's okay. Rachel wanted my life so badly she tried to destroy it. And in the process, she destroyed the one relationship she claimed to value most. The irony isn't lost on me. I still see her sometimes, from a distance. At family events I can't avoid, where she shows up despite knowing I'll be there. She stares at me with this mixture of longing and resentment, like she still doesn't understand why I won't just forgive her and move on. But I've moved on, just not in the direction she wanted. While some family members work in the shadows, others prefer to detonate your entire world in front of an audience, specifically Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving was always sacred in our family. It wasn't just a meal, it was the event of the year. My mum would start planning the menu in October. We'd have 20 relatives crowded around the table, kids at the folding table in the corner, everyone dressed up, the whole Norman Rockwell painting come to life. And every year, before we ate, we'd go around the table and share what we were grateful for. It was cheesy, sure, but it was our tradition. This year felt different from the start. My husband Mark seemed distracted while we were setting up. He kept checking his phone, stepping outside to take calls, saying it was work stuff that couldn't wait even on a holiday. I'd gotten used to the excuses by then. The late nights at the office, the weekend conferences, the business trips that seemed to multiply every month. I knew something was wrong. I'd known for a while. You don't spend 17 years married to someone without being able to tell when they're lying. But I didn't have proof, and more importantly, I didn't have the courage to blow up my life based on a gut feeling. My son Tyler knew, though. He's 15, observant, smart in that way that teenagers are when they're paying attention. He'd been quieter than usual over the past few months, spending more time in his room, less interested in family dinners. I thought it was just normal teenage stuff. Turns out, he'd been carrying a secret that was eating him alive. Thanksgiving Day arrived. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing. Relatives started showing up around noon. My parents, Mark's parents, siblings, cousins, kids running around. The usual chaos. We sat down to eat around 3, and after everyone had loaded their plates, it was time for the gratitude speeches. Tyler stood up first. Usually the youngest kids go first, but Tyler volunteered before anyone else could. He had his phone in his hand, which I thought was rude, but I didn't say anything. I just figured he'd written his speech in his notes app or something. He cleared his throat, and the room went quiet. Everyone was smiling, expecting the usual, I'm grateful for family and food and football type of speech. Instead, Tyler said, I'm grateful Mum will finally stop pretending everything's fine. The room stayed quiet, but the energy shifted. People glanced at each other, confused. I felt my stomach drop. Tyler continued, Dad's been cheating with his secretary for 2 years. I have the texts. Then he connected his phone to our living room TV. We have this setup where you can mirror your phone to the screen for watching videos or showing photos. Tyler had apparently planned this thoroughly, because within seconds, screenshots started appearing on the 70-inch TV mounted above our fireplace. Text messages, thousands of them, between Mark and a woman named Amber. Explicit messages, planning meetups, talking about hotel rooms, photos that I can't unsee, messages where Mark complained about me, said I didn't understand him, said he was going to leave me after the holidays so he could start fresh with her in the new year. The room went completely silent. You could hear the football game playing quietly in the other room. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. I just stared at the screen, reading message after message, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. Mark was frozen in his seat, his face cycling through shock, panic, and then anger. He stood up suddenly, lunging for Tyler's phone, but my brother-in-law, who's built like a linebacker and has never particularly liked Mark, stepped between them. He told Mark to sit down. Mark tried to argue, tried to say this was a private family matter, tried to demand Tyler turn it off. But Tyler just kept scrolling. More messages, more proof. 2 years' worth of affair, documented in excruciating detail. Mark's parents got up and left, just walked out without saying a word. My mum started crying. Mark's sister called him a piece of trash. One of the cousins, who's maybe 8 years old, asked what cheating meant, and her mum quickly ushered her into the other room. I should have been humiliated. I should have been mortified that my entire extended family was watching my marriage implode in real time. But instead, I felt this strange sense of liberation. Like a weight I didn't know I was carrying had suddenly been lifted. Tyler finally stopped scrolling and looked at me. He said, "I found these 4 months ago. I've been waiting for the right time to tell you. I knew you wouldn't believe me without proof, and I knew you'd been too scared to look for it yourself." He was right. I had been too scared. Scared of what I'd find. Scared of what it would mean. Scared of having to blow up our life. Mark tried to defend himself. Started saying the messages were taken out of context. That it wasn't what it looked like. That Tyler had manipulated the screenshots. But everyone had seen them. There was no context that made those messages okay. My dad, who's normally the most mild-mannered man alive, told Mark to get out. Mark tried to appeal to me, tried to say we should talk about this privately, that we could work through this. I told him to leave. He tried to argue, but my brother-in-law and my dad both stood up. Mark grabbed his coat and left, just walked out of our Thanksgiving dinner, out of our house, out of our lives. The dinner was obviously ruined. Some people tried to salvage it, tried to lighten the mood, but it was pointless. Relatives started leaving early, giving me hugs and supportive comments on their way out. My mom stayed to help clean up, but even she didn't know what to say. After everyone left, it was just Tyler and me sitting in the living room, surrounded by half-eaten plates of food and empty chairs. I asked him why he waited so long, why he didn't tell me immediately when he found the messages. He said he wanted to. He'd been wanting to tell me for months, but he knew I'd been in denial. He'd heard me making excuses for Mark's behavior, justifying the late nights and the distance. He knew that if he told me without proof, I might not believe him. Or worse, I might believe him, but stay anyway. So he waited. He gathered evidence, he made sure there was no room for doubt. And he picked Thanksgiving because he knew Mark couldn't leave, couldn't avoid it, couldn't talk his way out of it in front of everyone. Tyler had planned the whole thing like a tactical operation, and part of me felt guilty that my 15-year-old son had to carry that burden, had to be the one to expose the truth, because I'd been too afraid to look for it myself. But another part of me was grateful, because he was right. I would have kept pretending. I would have kept making excuses. I would have kept trying to hold together a marriage that had been dead for 2 years. Mark moved out that night. He went to Amber's place, I guess. I didn't ask, didn't care. He tried calling me the next day, tried to explain, tried to apologize. I didn't answer. I had a lawyer draft divorce papers within the week. The holidays were weird that year. Thanksgiving was a disaster, and I wasn't sure how we'd handle Christmas. But Tyler and I decided to make it our own. We redecorated the house, got rid of things that reminded me of Mark, bought new ornaments, new decorations. We spent Christmas Eve watching movies and eating takeout. Christmas morning was just the two of us, opening presents, laughing, starting fresh. People asked if I was okay, if Tyler was okay. And honestly, we were, better than we'd been in years. Tyler went back to being a normal teenager. His mood improved, his grades got better. He'd been carrying the weight of that secret for months, and now that it was out, he could just be a kid again. I started therapy. Started processing the betrayal, the lies, the years I'd wasted on someone who didn't value me. It was hard, but it was necessary. Mark tried to reconcile a few times, sent flowers, sent letters, showed up at the house once before I threatened to call the police. He claimed Amber had been a mistake, that he still loved me, that we could work through it. But you don't work through 2 years of calculated deception. You don't work through planning to leave your wife after the holidays. You don't work through explicit messages and hotel rooms and lies upon lies. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I got the house, got primary custody of Tyler, got alimony. Mark got Amber, and from what I heard, their relationship fell apart within a year. Turns out affairs don't make for great foundations. Tyler's now 17. We don't talk about Thanksgiving that often, but when we do, he doesn't regret it. He said he'd do it again, that I deserve to know the truth, that Mark deserved to be exposed. And he's right. I think about that day sometimes, about how my 15-year-old son had more courage than I did, about how he waited for the perfect moment, gathered his evidence, and detonated the truth in front of everyone who mattered. It was brutal. It was humiliating for Mark. It was messy and public and probably traumatized a few of the younger cousins. But it was also necessary, because I wasn't going to do it. I was going to keep pretending everything was fine until Mark left me on his own terms, after the holidays, just like he'd planned. Tyler took that power away from him. Tyler gave me the truth, even though it hurt, and that truth set me free. From family dinners to office politics, betrayal has a way of finding you, especially when your boss thinks they're untouchable. I'd spent 5 years building relationships with our firm's top clients as a marketing director. 5 years of late-night calls, of remembering birthdays and anniversaries, of understanding their businesses better than they did sometimes. I knew their kids' names, their favorite restaurants, their pain points and goals. These weren't just accounts to me. They were relationships I'd cultivated carefully, deliberately, over thousands of hours of work. My boss Richard took credit for everything. Every successful campaign, every retained client, every new contract. He'd walk into meetings I'd spent weeks preparing for, shake hands, smile, and act like he'd done all the heavy lifting. Then he'd promise me a partnership, always next quarter, always after this big project, always just out of reach. I believed him for longer than I should have. I wanted to believe that hard work would be rewarded, that loyalty mattered, that doing good work was enough. Turns out I was wrong on all counts. Richard called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. I thought it was finally happening. The partnership conversation. He'd been hinting at it for weeks, saying we needed to discuss my future with the firm. Instead, he fired me. Budget cuts, he said. The firm was restructuring. They needed to reduce overhead. My position was being eliminated. He handed me a severance package that was insultingly small for 5 years of work and told me I had until the end of the day to pack my things. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what was happening. I asked about the partnership he'd promised. He actually laughed, said I'd misunderstood, that he'd never made any official promises, that I shouldn't have assumed. Then he mentioned his nephew would be joining the team, fresh out of college, eager to learn and willing to work for half my salary. He didn't even try to hide it. He was replacing me with family and saving money in the process. I could have argued, could have threatened legal action, could have made a scene. Instead, I smiled, said I understood, and started packing my boxes. Richard looked relieved. He probably expected me to cry or beg or cause drama. The fact that I took it calmly seemed to make him think he'd gotten away with it cleanly. He had no idea what was coming. I packed my personal items, said goodbye to a few co-workers who looked genuinely sad to see me go, and walked out of that office for the last time. In my car, I sat for a few minutes, letting the anger and humiliation wash over me. Then I made a decision. If Richard wanted to play dirty, I could play dirtier. What Richard didn't know, what he'd never bothered to understand, was that I'd built every single client relationship on personal trust, not company loyalty. These clients didn't care about the firm's name. They cared about results, and they trusted me to deliver those results. I went home and spent the rest of the day setting up my own consultancy, filed the LLC paperwork, built a basic website, drafted service agreements. By midnight, I had a functioning business. The next morning, I started making calls. I reached out to my top clients, not to badmouth Richard or the firm, but simply to let them know I was going independent and would love to continue working with them if they were interested. I kept it professional, kept it about the work, kept it about the relationships we'd built over years. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, 12 of our 15 major clients had signed with me. They didn't hesitate, didn't need to think about it. They just said yes, when can we start? Send over the contracts. $4 million in annual revenue walked out the door with me. Richard didn't notice at first. He was too busy training his nephew, too confident that the clients would stay because the firm had always retained them. He probably thought I'd fade away quietly, find another job somewhere, never be heard from again. Then the cancellation notices started arriving. I heard through the grapevine that Richard had a complete meltdown when he realized what was happening. He called an emergency meeting, demanded to know who'd been in contact with me, accused people of corporate espionage, but there was no espionage. I hadn't stolen client lists or confidential information. I just maintained relationships that were always mine to begin with. Richard called me 3 days after the exodus began. The call went straight to voicemail because I didn't answer numbers I didn't recognize anymore. He left a message that was equal parts frantic and furious, demanding I call him back immediately. I didn't. Then came the emails. First, threatening legal action for stealing clients. Except I hadn't stolen anything. The clients had chosen to leave. They'd made independent business decisions to work with me instead of the firm. That's not theft, that's competition. His lawyer must have told him the same thing, because the legal threat stopped and the tone shifted. He started begging, sent emails asking me to reconsider, to come back, to help him salvage what was left. He offered me the partnership he'd promised years ago, offered me a raise, offered me equity, offered me everything he should have given me before he fired me. And here's where it gets absurd. Richard actually showed up at my apartment one evening. I have no idea how he got my address, but there he was, looking haggard and desperate. He said the firm was collapsing, that he'd made a mistake, that he needed me to bring the clients back. I asked about his nephew. Richard waved his hand dismissively and said the kid was useless, that he'd been a mistake, that I was the one who really ran things. The lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. I told Richard I wasn't interested, that I'd built something of my own, that I was happy, that his problems weren't mine anymore. He tried arguing, tried guilting me about loyalty to the firm, about the years we'd worked together. I reminded him that he'd fired me to save money and hire his nephew, that he'd taken credit for my work for 5 years, that he'd dangled a partnership like a carrot and then laughed when I asked about it. He didn't have a response to that. I went back inside and closed the door. Richard stood there for a few minutes, then left. I watched from my window as he sat in his car for a while before driving away. The emails continued for another week, desperate, angry, pleading. I didn't respond to any of them. Finally, I sent one reply. Just one. A screenshot of my new company's revenue projections for the first year, which exceeded what I'd been making at the firm by a significant margin, and I wrote thanks for the motivation. Richard's firm collapsed 6 months later. The remaining clients left, the staff quit, and the business that had taken decades to build just dissolved. Richard tried to keep it afloat, but without the client relationships and without anyone competent to manage the work, it was doomed. Last I heard, Richard was working for his nephew's new startup, in a junior position. The nephew had apparently learned enough during his brief stint to start his own company, and Richard needed a job, so he swallowed his pride and took it. The poetic justice is almost too perfect. My consultancy is thriving. I hired 3 people this year, all talented professionals who are undervalued at their previous jobs. I treat them well, pay them fairly, and give credit where it's due. We've picked up new clients beyond the original 12, and I'm on track to double revenue next year. People ask if I feel bad about what happened to Richard, if I regret how it all played out. Honestly, no. Richard made his choices. He chose to take credit for work he didn't do. He chose to break promises. He chose to fire someone who'd been loyal to him for 5 years so he could save money and do a favor for family. I just made different choices. I chose to value relationships. I chose to do good work. I chose to bet on myself when no one else would. Richard thought he was untouchable, thought the clients would stay because the firm's name was on the contracts. He forgot that business is personal, that relationships matter, that trust takes years to build, and seconds to destroy. He destroyed his own business. I just gave the clients an alternative. Career revenge is sweet, but imagine watching your backstabbing coworker's face when you walk into the office as their new owner. I was up for VP when my coworker Jennifer spread false rumors about me having an affair with our married CEO. I'd spent 8 years at this company, working my way up from an entry-level analyst position to director of operations. The VP role was supposed to be mine. Everyone knew it. I'd been doing the work for over a year, managing teams, leading projects, delivering results that exceeded every metric. Jennifer had joined the company 3 years ago as a senior manager. She was ambitious, I'll give her that. But she had this way of taking shortcuts, of playing politics instead of doing the actual work. She'd schmooze with executives, take credit for other people's ideas, and somehow always manage to be in the right place at the right time to claim victories she hadn't earned. When the VP position opened up, we were both in the running, but everyone, including Jennifer, knew I was the front runner. I had the experience, the track record, the respect of the teams. Jennifer had charisma and a talent for manipulation. Apparently, that was enough. About a month before the board was set to make their decision, I started noticing people acting weird around me. Conversations would stop when I walked into rooms. Colleagues who used to be friendly became distant. The CEO, who I'd worked closely with on several projects, suddenly seemed uncomfortable in meetings with me. I asked a friend at the company what was going on. She hesitated, then finally told me there were rumors. People were saying I was having an affair with the CEO, that we'd been seen together at hotels, that his marriage was falling apart because of me. I was stunned. None of it was true. I'd never had anything but a professional relationship with the CEO. I'd met his wife at company events. The whole thing was absurd. But the rumors persisted. And then came the evidence. Someone, and I later found out it was Jennifer, had created fake evidence to support the rumors. Photoshopped images of me and the CEO in compromising situations. Fake testimonies from anonymous sources claiming they'd witnessed inappropriate behavior. Even fabricated text messages that looked like they were between us. The board launched an investigation. They brought me in, asked me directly if the rumors were true. I denied everything, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. The evidence looked convincing, and I had no way to prove it was fabricated. The CEO denied it too, but the damage was done. His wife knew about the rumors. The board was concerned about optics. Even if nothing had happened, the appearance of impropriety was enough to sink both of us. I was passed over for the promotion. Jennifer got the VP position instead. The CEO managed to keep his job, but his reputation was destroyed. His marriage ended, and I became persona non grata at the company I'd dedicated 8 years of my life to. I could afford it, could have hired lawyers, demanded forensic analysis of the photos, pushed for a real investigation. But I was exhausted and humiliated, and I realized I didn't want to work for a company that would believe fabricated evidence over 8 years of proven loyalty and results, so I quietly resigned. Jennifer looked sympathetic when I turned in my resignation. She even said she was sorry things had turned out this way, that she hoped I'd land on my feet. The audacity of it made me physically ill. I took my savings, everything I'd accumulated over 8 years, and used it as a down payment on a business loan. I started my own firm, competing directly with my former company. Same industry, same services, better execution. The first 6 months were brutal. I was working 18-hour days, doing everything myself, trying to build something from nothing. But I had knowledge they didn't know I had. I knew which clients were unhappy. I knew which employees were undervalued. I knew where the weaknesses were. I started poaching employees, not Jennifer's lackeys, but the people who actually did the work, the talented ones who were tired of watching people like Jennifer take credit for their efforts. I offered them better pay, better culture, and equity in a company that would actually value them. They came. One by one, the best people from my old company jumped ship. Then I went after the clients. 3 of our former company's biggest accounts had been unhappy for a while. I knew because I'd been managing those relationships before I left. I reached out, pitched them on my new firm, and promised better service at competitive rates. They signed, all 3 of them. Within 18 months, my firm was thriving. We'd grown to 30 employees, had a dozen major clients, and were pulling in revenue that made my old company's numbers look weak. The parent corporation noticed. They reached out with an offer to buy me out. A generous offer, the kind of money that would set me up for life. But I didn't want money. I wanted justice. Instead of accepting the buyout, I pitched them a different deal. Let me acquire my old company. It was struggling, losing clients and talent, dragging down the parent corporation's portfolio. I could turn it around, integrate it into my operations, and make it profitable again. I showed them projections, showed them my track record, showed them how much value I could create if they let me take over. They agreed. I acquired my old company for a fraction of what it had been worth when I'd worked there. The company I'd helped build, the company that had thrown me away based on lies, was now mine. My first day as CEO, I walked into the building I used to call home. Employees who'd watched me leave in disgrace 18 months ago now watched me return as their boss. Some looked relieved, others looked terrified. I had a list of changes to make, but first I had one specific piece of business to handle. I walked into Jennifer's office, the office that used to be the VP's office, the office that should have been mine. Jennifer looked up from her desk, and I watched the color drain from her face as she realized what was happening. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told her she was fired, effective immediately. She tried to apologize, started talking about how she'd been desperate, how she'd made mistakes, how she'd do anything to keep her job. She actually cried. I let her finish. Then I said, desperation doesn't excuse destruction. What you did didn't just hurt me. You destroyed a man's marriage. You set back workplace culture here by years. You taught everyone that lies and manipulation are more valuable than hard work and integrity. She tried to argue, tried to say she'd been under pressure, that she'd been scared I'd get the promotion instead of her, that she'd panicked. I cut her off. I told her that security would escort her out, that she had 30 minutes to pack her personal items, that her access to company systems had already been revoked. Then I turned and walked out of her office. My office now. Security escorted her out 20 minutes later. I watched from my window as she carried a box to her car, the same way I'd carried a box to my car 18 months ago. The difference was I'd used that moment as fuel. I'd let it motivate me to build something better. Jennifer just looked broken. Part of me expected to feel triumphant, to feel vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. I spent the next 6 months restructuring the company. I fired the people who'd helped Jennifer spread the rumors. I promoted the people who'd been overlooked. I rebuilt the culture from the ground up. The CEO who'd been caught up in Jennifer's lies had already left the company. His life had been destroyed by the rumors, true or not. I reached out to him, explained what had really happened, offered to help clear his name. He appreciated the gesture, but said he'd moved on and didn't want to revisit that chapter of his life. I understood that. Some things are too painful to dig back up, even for closure. Jennifer tried reaching out a few times after being fired, sent emails, LinkedIn messages, even tried calling. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I heard through the grapevine that she'd had trouble finding work. Turns out, when you build your career on lies and manipulation, people eventually figure it out. Her reputation was shot and no one wanted to take a chance on her. My company, the merged entity, is thriving now. We're one of the top firms in our industry. The employees are happy, the clients are satisfied, and I built it all from the ashes of my worst professional moment. People ask how I did it. How I went from being fired in disgrace to owning the company in less than 2 years. The truth is, Jennifer did me a favor. She showed me that playing by the rules and trusting institutions to do the right thing was naive. She showed me that sometimes you have to build your own table instead of fighting for a seat at someone else's. And most importantly, she gave me the motivation I needed to stop being comfortable and start being exceptional. I don't thank her for it. What she did was cruel and calculated and wrong, but I did turn it into something good. I turned my anger and humiliation into fuel, and I built something she could never destroy. That's the best revenge, not destruction, but creation. Building something so successful that the person who tried to tear you down becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the person who records your worst moment thinks they're destroying you, but they're actually handing you the perfect evidence. I had a breakdown after a client pulled a $2 million deal. Not just any breakdown, a full-on, lose your composure, yell and cry and throw papers kind of meltdown. The kind of breakdown you have in private, in your car or your office with the door closed, not in front of your assistant. But I did have it in front of my assistant, and that was my first mistake. The deal had been 6 months in the making, a major contract with a tech company that would have been the biggest win of my career. I'd worked endless hours on the proposal, coordinated with multiple departments, pitched and repitched until I could recite the presentation in my sleep. The client had verbally committed. We were days away from signing. Then they pulled out, sent an email saying they'd decided to go with another firm. No explanation, no warning, just thanks, but no thanks. I was devastated. This wasn't just a professional loss, it was personal. I'd put everything into this deal. I'd promised my boss it was locked in. I'd already started planning how I'd use the commission. When I got the email, I was in my office with my assistant Maya. I read it, and something in me just snapped. I started yelling about how unfair it was, how the client had wasted our time, how nothing ever worked out. I threw papers off my desk. I cried. I said things I shouldn't have said about the client, about my job, about everything. Maya sat there quietly, looking sympathetic, occasionally handing me tissues. I thought she was being supportive. Turns out, she was recording the whole thing, 15 minutes of my worst moment, captured on video. 2 days later, it was on TikTok. Caption: Toxic Boss Exposed. The video was edited to make me look as unhinged as possible. My face was blurred, but my voice was clear. You could hear me yelling, crying, throwing things. You could see the papers flying. It looked exactly like what the caption said: a toxic boss having a meltdown. The video went viral immediately. 8 million views in 3 days, thousands of comments calling me every name in the book, people sharing their own toxic boss stories, media outlets picking it up as an example of corporate culture problems. And I had to watch it happen in real time, recognizing my own voice, my own office, my own worst moment, broadcast to millions of people. I was humiliated, absolutely destroyed. I couldn't leave my apartment, couldn't check social media without seeing my breakdown shared and mocked. Friends and family saw it, colleagues saw it, everyone knew. The company's HR department launched an investigation. They called me in, asked me about the video, asked if it was real. I admitted it was me, but tried to explain the context. That I'd just lost a huge deal, that I was having a human moment, that I'd never acted like that before or since. But the narrative was already set. I was the toxic boss, the tyrant, the person who threw things and yelled at their assistant. HR placed me on administrative leave while they investigated. Maya was celebrated as a brave whistleblower. She did interviews, talked about how hard it was to work for someone like me, how she'd been documenting my behavior for months. Months. She'd been planning this. I felt helpless. My reputation was destroyed, my job was in jeopardy, and everyone believed I was the villain. But here's the thing, I'd been recording too. After a previous incident where an employee made false accusations against me that were eventually disproven, I'd started keeping audio logs of important meetings and conversations. Just voice recordings on my phone for my own protection. I kept them backed up in the cloud, dated and organized. I went through those recordings and found something interesting. The week before the client pulled out, I'd had a meeting with Maya about the proposal. I'd asked her to send the client our final pricing and terms. She'd confirmed she would handle it. But when I reviewed the recordings from that day and cross-referenced them with my email logs, I realized something was wrong. I requested copies of all correspondence with the client from IT. They pulled everything, including emails I hadn't been copied on. Maya had sent the client incorrect information. She deliberately changed the pricing in the proposal she sent them, making our offer look significantly worse than it actually was. She'd altered terms, added clauses we'd never discussed, made it look like we were trying to pull a bait and switch. The client had pulled out because Maya had sabotaged the deal. She'd manufactured the situation that caused my breakdown, recorded the breakdown, and posted it for millions to see. All to create viral content and position herself as a victim of a toxic workplace. The realization hit me like a truck. This wasn't about exposing bad behavior. This was calculated, premeditated. She'd destroyed a $2 million deal and my reputation just to get views and sympathy. I took everything to HR. The audio recordings, the email evidence, the timeline showing exactly what Maya had done. HR brought in forensic IT specialists to verify everything. They confirmed the emails were real, that Maya had sent unauthorized and incorrect information to the client, that she'd deliberately sabotaged the deal. They also found that she'd been accessing confidential files she had no authorization to view. taking screenshots of sensitive information, planning more content, more exposés, more viral moments. The investigation flipped. Suddenly, Maya wasn't a brave whistleblower. She was a corporate saboteur who'd committed multiple fireable offenses. HR fired her immediately for corporate sabotage, breach of confidentiality, unauthorized access to company systems, and violation of recording consent laws. The company's legal team got involved. I was reinstated with a formal apology. But my reputation was still destroyed. The video was still out there. 8 million people had seen it. The damage was done. So I sued Maya for defamation, emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and damages related to the lost deal. My lawyer was ruthless. She presented every piece of evidence showing what Maya had actually done. She showed the emails proving sabotage. She showed how Maya had deliberately created the situation, recorded it without consent, and posted it with a misleading narrative. Maya tried to defend herself, claimed she was just documenting workplace abuse, but the evidence was overwhelming. She'd sabotaged a deal, manufactured a crisis, and then exploited it for social media clout. We settled out of court, 6 figures, enough to cover my legal fees, compensate me for the damage to my reputation, and make sure Maya understood that actions have consequences. Part of the settlement required Maya to post a public apology video, a full retraction, admitting what she'd done, acknowledging that she'd sabotaged the deal and misrepresented the situation. She posted it. It got 3,000 views, barely a blip compared to the 8 million who'd seen the original video. The truth never goes as viral as the lie, but at least it was out there. At least people who cared to look would see that there was more to the story. I returned to work, but it was different. Colleagues who'd supported me were sympathetic, but there was a wariness now. I was the person who'd had a public meltdown, even if the context was more complicated than it seemed. I ended up leaving the company 6 months later, not because I was forced out, but because I couldn't move past what had happened. Every meeting, every interaction, I wondered if people were seeing me as I was, or as the viral video portrayed me. I started my own consulting firm. Smaller clients, more control, less public exposure. It's been good. Different, but good. Maya's career never recovered. Companies Google candidates now, and her name is permanently associated with corporate sabotage and defamation. The viral fame she wanted ended up destroying her professional credibility. I think about that a lot. About how she sacrificed everything for 15 minutes of viral fame. How she destroyed a $2 million deal, ruined my reputation, and tanked her own career, all for views and likes and sympathy from strangers. The irony is that if she'd just done her job, if she'd sent the correct proposal to the client, we probably would have closed the deal. She would have gotten her commission. I would have gotten mine. Everyone would have won. But she wanted more than success. She wanted to be the hero of her own story. And in trying to create that narrative, she became the villain. When the evidence turns against you, sometimes the only option is exposing the person everyone trusts, even if it means ruining Christmas. Our company's Christmas party was always extravagant, but this year felt different. Open bar, catered food, live band, the whole corporate celebration package. My manager, Patricia, loved these events. She'd give a speech every year about our amazing accomplishments, our incredible team, our bright future. But this year, I knew something she didn't. I knew where the budget had really gone. Patricia had been my manager for 3 years. She was good at her job, or at least she seemed to be. She took credit for department successes, managed up effectively, and had the executives convinced she was indispensable. But over the past year, I'd started noticing things that didn't add up. Budget reports with discrepancies, invoices for vendors I'd never heard of, expense reports that seemed inflated, bonuses that were supposed to go to employees but never materialized. At first, I thought it was just administrative errors, but the more I looked, the more wrong it seemed. So I started investigating, quietly, carefully. I spent months going through financial records, comparing invoices to actual deliverables, tracking payments to vendors. I recovered deleted emails from the server using IT tools I wasn't supposed to have access to. I cross-referenced expense reports with company credit card statements, and I found a pattern. Patricia had been embezzling from the company for at least 2 years, maybe longer. She'd created fake vendor companies, registered to her husband, and paid them for services that were never rendered. She'd forged signatures on expense reports, claiming reimbursement for purchases she never made. She'd diverted employee bonuses to her own accounts. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe over $1 million. She'd been stealing from the company, from our department's budget, from employees' bonuses, all while giving speeches about teamwork and integrity. I compiled everything into a presentation, 50 slides of evidence, bank transfers, fake vendor registrations, deleted emails I'd recovered, forged signatures, everything. Then I waited for the Christmas party. The party was at a nice hotel ballroom. Everyone was dressed up, drinks flowing, music playing. Patricia gave her annual speech about our amazing year, our record-breaking performance, our incredible team. I listened from the back of the room, laptop in hand. When she finished her speech and asked if anyone wanted to say anything, I raised my hand, asked if I could make a toast. Patricia looked surprised but smiled and handed me the microphone. The room went quiet, everyone raising their glasses, expecting some sentimental year-end reflection. Instead, I plugged my laptop into the projector. The first slide appeared on the screen behind Patricia. Title, Where Our Budget Really Went. Patricia's face went from confused to pale in about 2 seconds. I started presenting, calmly, methodically, like it was any other business presentation. Slide by slide, I showed the evidence. Bank transfers to Patricia's personal accounts. Fake vendor companies registered to her husband. Deleted emails I'd recovered, showing her coordinating the fraud. Forged signatures on expense reports. Bonuses that never reached employees. The room was dead silent. People had put down their drinks. The CFO, who'd been chatting with the CEO near the bar, pushed his way to the front, staring at the screen. Patricia tried to interrupt, tried to say this was inappropriate, that I was making false accusations, that this was a party, not a business meeting. But I kept presenting. The evidence was undeniable. By slide 20, the CFO had pulled out his phone and was making calls. By slide 30, security had been summoned. By slide 50, Patricia was being escorted out of the ballroom, while 300 employees watched in stunned silence. She tried to grab the microphone from me at one point. Security stopped her. She tried to claim the evidence was fake. The CFO told her to stop talking and call her lawyer. They escorted her out through the side door. The party was obviously over. People stood around in shocked clusters, trying to process what had just happened. The CEO approached me, asked how long I'd known. I told him months. He asked why I'd waited until the Christmas party. I told him because I wanted everyone to see it. Because she'd stolen from all of us, and we all deserved to know. He didn't look happy, but he didn't argue. The company pressed criminal charges immediately. The evidence I'd compiled became the foundation of the prosecution's case. Patricia was arrested, charged with embezzlement, fraud, and about 6 other financial crimes. She tried to fight it, but there was too much evidence. She eventually took a plea deal. 4 years in prison, full restitution, permanent ban from holding any financial management position. I was promoted to her position 3 months later. Not because I'd exposed her, but because in doing so, I demonstrated I understood the department's finances better than anyone else. My first act as manager was implementing transparent financial systems. Every invoice, every expense, every budget allocation, fully documented and auditable. I made sure every employee could see where money was going. No more fake vendors, no more forged signatures, no more stolen bonuses. People still talk about that Christmas party. Best one we ever had, some say, with a hint of dark humor. The night we found out our manager was a thief and got the world's most uncomfortable corporate presentation. I don't regret how I did it. Patricia had been stealing for years, living off money that should have gone to employees, to projects, to growth. She'd smiled and given speeches about integrity while robbing us blind. She deserved to be exposed, and everyone deserved to know the truth. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, life has a strange way of balancing the scales. Whether it's through your own courage, unexpected allies, or karma finally doing its job, the truth always finds daylight eventually. Sometimes the betrayal we survive becomes the foundation for something stronger. Keep your receipts, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of showing up as your authentic self when everyone expects you to crumble. If you've made it this far into the chaos tonight, you're part of this community now. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment about which story hit closest to home, and I'll see you in the next video where we dive even deeper into the beautiful mess of human drama. Until then, sleep well knowing that every ending, no matter how painful, is really just a beginning in disguise.